Welcome, everybody, to our next interview in the series with all the various mentors that we have for the Palestinians Foundation. My name is Peter Harrison. I'm the president of the organization. We got started a number of years ago to help with creating software for the open source community to help people on the island of Jamaica. And now it has expanded. We have a primary software application called Talawa. It is used to help community-based organizations manage their membership, and we have three applications for that. We have the mobile app, which is called Talawa. Then we have Talawa API, which is the essentially the interface with the database, and then we have a management portal that handles everything behind the scenes. Um, Today we have Troy Anderson. He's one of our mentors. He's based in Jamaica, and he's going to talk to us about his life in the software development arena, some of the challenges in the Jamaican environment, his aspirations, etc., for his career. And I think it'll be really interesting. If you've heard some of the other interviews that we've had, they have gone in various directions, which I think are really interesting. And I think this one will be interesting too. So, welcome, Troy.
Hey Peter, thanks for having me on. It's really an honor. You said you wanted me to speak specifically about, I guess, my career trajectory as it pertains to software development in Jamaica.
Yeah, so let's talk primarily about like what made you make that decision to be a software engineer? Because I've asked that question of everybody, and everybody has a
Yeah,
slightly different answer. So
it's
what
actually
is it?
it's actually really funny because so growing up, my mom always said that, hey Troy, when you grow up, you're gonna be a doctor, right? So throughout my entire school career or education, I would always, chose the sciences. So all the way up to, we have like a sixth form program in Jamaica. So you do grades, 1 up to 11, then sixth form. So you could do grades 12 and 13. So in grade 13, for whatever reason, I didn't pick your traditional science subject. So I didn't pick biology because I didn't like reading. And I didn't pick chemistry because I had a lot of reading in it as well. So I chose math. I chose physics because I kind of liked physics because it felt close to math. And I saw computer science. I'm like, okay, this sounds cool. I've been good at IT before. So I chose it. And then I don't know, it just clicked. Like with every problem, every issue that came up, I was able to research and find a solution. I even remember there was this point where I had this old clunky laptop, right? And it broke. But during that time, the school was issuing tablets. So I was able to get like a C compiler on my tablet, and then I realized that there was some difference in the architecture and language, and I researched that and figured out how to, you know, build C applications on the tablet. So it was just a whole different experience. It's like magic. It's hard to kind of elaborate on it, but
Yeah,
it was just
yeah.
like it just felt like it connected. So after those 2 years now of sixth form, I was like, maybe the doctor thing isn't it, right? Because throughout that whole aspect, I never like felt attached to it, right? It was more so growing up. My mom said you're going to be a doctor, so I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to be a doctor. But after those 2 years of computer science, I'm like, okay, I'm going to college now, and I need to do computer science. Like it cannot be anything else. And the rest has kind of been history, to be honest.
It's interesting because you wanted to be a doctor. Your mother
Yes,
said wanted to be a doctor, and you didn't like and you didn't like biology. So that that automatically,
ironic, right?
you're right. That that
Cancels it
that
out.
that could be a little difficult,
Hmm.
being a doctor not liking biology and even chemistry to some extent, right? So that's really interesting. I was just talking with Noman, is the pronunciation he told me, and he's another one of the mentors that we have with the program, and he had an interesting trajectory. His sister is in was a doctor, and he decided he chose the medical path. And I told him that when I was young, I really, really wanted to be a doctor. This was not like my mother saying, you need to be a doctor. This was
Yes,
Peter wanted to be a doctor.
yes.
And I would go to the library in Jamaica in Tom Redcombe Road, and I would borrow um, the the encyclopedia books, right? And I would go in and I would write out the articles in the encyclopedia on the various medical topics. I'd write them out in my
Notebook.
in a notebook and take them home and read them. And eventually, I got my own
Oh.
set of secondhand encyclopedias from some family up in the States, and I did the same thing. And I was going to be a doctor.
I'm seeing some
And
trends here.
yeah, endocrine system, that was me, right? That was the stuff that I was interested in, and I decided to see whether doctoring was the thing for me, and I decided to volunteer to give out library books at the university hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go around with the trolley, and I was giving out the books, and I started to realize that being a doctor was not just diagnosing people and then walking over to the next person, diagnosing people and walking over to the next person. It was a lot of human interaction.
Yes.
Things like when I was giving out the books, people would ask me questions like, is this book the right book? They would also say things like, my son never visited me today, but maybe he'll visit me tomorrow. I'm not sure. I'm going to have an operation. And I don't. And I just said to myself, man, this is just not me. It's just not a part of my being. And one of the other things that I noticed was that being a doctor, if you're not working, you're not earning an income.
Yeah, that's
And and so I said, I need to be in a situation where I can rely on other people to help me with my income.
mm-hmm.
And so I started looking at it and saying, well, law is the same problem. And so I decided to do engineering, and that was it. That was the so just by a process of elimination. And so I went and did electrical engineering. I
Mm-hmm.
did a little project which had some computing related to it. I did some computing stuff, and when I went home, my father had an IBM PC clone,
Yeah.
and it had Quick Basic installed on it, and so I started doing coding. And one of the things that I really liked about coding was that, as opposed to the traditional engineering path, was that software development provided me with independence.
Mm-hmm.
In that, if I had an idea about what I wanted to do, I could write it in software and I could see immediate results. With
Yes.
traditional engineering, I would have to have another additional outlay of income or money to buy the motor, buy the transformer, buy the chip, buy the this. But software, all of that is done for you already. And
Yeah,
so I
that's
said,
true.
and so I said, this was the interesting thing. And the other thing I liked about software development was that when you're writing a piece of code, even
Mm-hmm.
if it's just a small function, it works. You feel good to yourself, right? And then you write the
Yeah, like
test, it feels good,
accomplishment.
right?
Yeah.
And so writing software is just a series of um, episodes of gratification, and that just goes right throughout the day. And I found that was something that was very stimulating for me. And so here I
Yeah.
am doing various types of hybrid types of work. So in your field, now that you're in the Jamaican context, and I've asked this question to everybody, there are many areas in which software development is evolving right now. There's security, there's blockchain, there's AI, machine learning, there's fintech related type things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in where do you see your own career path going, given all of these various types of trajectories in both the Jamaican context and maybe even beyond?
The thing, Peter, the thing with software development is it's, especially in Jamaica, it's more solution oriented. So what tends to happen is that you're working within a domain, so maybe medicine, banking, logistics, and then you'll be presented with problems, and then that's how you branch off in these other subcategories of technology, right? Because
Mhm.
I started off just doing simple applications for UTech, right? So I
Mhm.
helped them build a job fair. So that was just a simple CRUD application that helped with graduates and hiring.
Okay, so
And then
hang on a second. So let's many people may not know some of these acronyms that you're talking about, right? So you
oh
talked about UTech, you
yeah,
talked about CRUD. Let's help some
yeah.
people out here.
All right. So UTech is the University of Technology in Jamaica. So that's where I studied and got my degree, my undergrad in computer science. And CRUD is just I guess standard application that do create, read, upload, update, and delete operations. Um, and what I found out was that was like the baseline for me. So I did those applications. I helped the school build those applications, and then over time we'd have different issues, right? So we have a server. We're trying to maintain the server, or we need to try to handle load, or we need to start the authentication, or for example, no, I work within banking, right? But I'm starting to delve more into things like blockchain, into cryptography, things like that. So what tends to happen is that I have a problem first, and then it's now my responsibility as an engineer to kind of figure out what the optimal solution will be. And that has me moving between, as I said, cryptography, blockchain, file manipulation, videography, you name it, really and truly.
And so, when you're doing a lot of these things, do you work as a part of a team? Are some of these solutions being developed by you alone? How does that sort of work in your working environment?
Yeah, I wish I was that good to be doing all these amazing things alone. But generally, and it's for good reason, right? You generally work with a team. Most of what I know now is a consequence of working with some really amazing and talented other engineers. Some of them who were my mentor during my time, and you work with them. You solve problems together, and that's kind of how you grow as a engineer. The funny thing is, as I speak about growth, I recall when I was doing the mentorship for Google Summer of Code, a lot of times I would learn while reviewing code from students. Like I'd go through and I'm like, oh, that's a pretty, good way of solving that problem. I wouldn't have thought about that. And I would also be able to give them advice. Okay, I like how you've done this implementation. I recommend doing this as well. Or I can like take an idea that they do and like try it on my own project and say, okay, how would this work practically, right? Because sometimes they look good on paper, right? But when you actually try to integrate into application, you probably find like other roadblocks, or it's super complex and nobody else can figure it out. And then when I figure out, like, I can like bring it back to the project and be like, okay, guys, this is actually a very good approach, and you just need to tweak this little thing here. So it also showed me that there are a lot of ways you can learn while in this career. I recall you mentioned something about I guess the barrier to entrance to like software development. Because if you're doing hardware intensive work, you need the motors, you need probably an Arduino, you probably need a Raspberry Pi. But what I loved about software was you just need a laptop. It can be the slowest, clunkiest laptop or tablet, but as long as you're able to get a compiler on and you can learn a language, you can get the ball moving.
Yes, what you're saying is really true, and a there's a very very strong um, learning lesson
Curve,
to be.
maybe.
Yeah, no, more not so much a learning curve, but more a learning lesson with what you're
Hmm.
talking about with the mentorship and the fact that you're learning from others. You're in many cases like what you're talking about. You're learning from people who are new in the industry. They're thinking about new ways of doing things. Many
Exactly.
many times, students don't have many of the limitations that people in the working world have. So, for example, and that allows them to have more creativity.
Hmm.
Your capacity as a working person, especially if you have a family, is limited because you have to be creative at work, you have to be creative at home, you have all these other distractions that limit the amount of time that you can be creative on a particular area. Students don't have as many of those limitations. They may not have the experience, but they don't have the limitations, and so therefore
Yeah,
you
that's
can learn, right. So you can learn from that and apply it, like just like you mentioned, to your own world. And it's really good to have that experience very early on in your career, um, because it allows you to have an experience in which you're A, collaborating, B, collaborating with people that who may know more about a particular topic than you do.
true.
You have to express the fact that you may not necessarily know it. I'm doing that constantly, letting people know that Dart and TypeScript is not my strength, but based on based
Hmm.
on my knowledge of Python, something
Yeah,
smells funny here, right? And so I try to do stuff like that. I try to provide structure to the project, and so that really helps. But the other thing also is that it encourages collaboration with people in a non-threatening environment.
that's true.
So often people feel threatened by this new technology, new ways of thinking, new people in the industry. And what happens is that as you move and have more experience in the industry, your value is not so much what you know, but it's also who you know. You know
Hmm.
somebody who has done this in the past, and therefore they should be able to help. And so you act as the glue between some of these other things. And so we see that with what we're doing with the Palisades Foundation, in which I don't know something, but I look at the PRs and I say, hey, is this related to this other pull request? These modifications that are being proposed look very similar to something else that has been done. Talk to this person, etc. And so that really does help. And in the especially in the Jamaican context, where many aspects of the economy are sort of stagnant, in which there are very few opportunities. And so therefore, if you have an opportunity available to you, you want to hold on to it as much as possible. And anything that could change that opportunity is viewed as a threat. With software development, you now have this thing in which your horizons are not just limited by the boundaries of the island or of the country itself. It now provides you with new opportunities, and so therefore it opens up the opportunities. And in order for those opportunities to be exposed, you also need to expose yourself, the vulnerabilities in terms of your knowledge, but also expose yourself in terms of the strengths of your knowledge as well. So that really helps. That's just interesting. I'm glad we're having this conversation. It's always stimulates discussion. Okay, so you've been mentioning that you work with in the finance area. You've been doing some stuff with blockchain. Things are related in the Jamaican software arena, more upon application verticals that you've mentioned before. Is there a particular application vertical that you think would be transformative outside of the blockchain that you just mentioned? Because I spoke with some of the other mentors, and they all came and said, blockchain is the thing, blockchain is the thing. But surely there must be other stuff that might be interesting that's not as talked about. Blockchain is the buzzword of the year, but it may not be the buzzword of the year next year. So
it definitely has to be AI. Like if you have your ears close to the digital waves, then you can see there are a lot of new and very unique and creative solutions coming out now in the AI space. Because for example, just ChatGPT alone, right? I'm able to give it a prompt, give it a problem, and say, hey, write me Flutter code to get this done. And I'm not gonna lie, 9 times out of 10, it's absolutely terrible code, but it serves as like inspiration. Like I can see the bot code me up something, and I'm like, I see what you're trying. That's not how that works, but I can do something with that information.
Right.
Or I can use it for like research. So for example, recently I had a task to do some I work in finance, right? So I had to connect a DeFi wallet. So DeFi, we're talking about decentralized finance, right? So you're having to have a crypto wallet like MetaMask or Trust Wallet. So we're a banking platform, and my job was to connect a DeFi wallet to the banking app, right? So I was able to do some quick research with using ChatGPT to get definitions, because I need to know what I'm working with. So I need to know the definition of the protocols, the processes, and how I would cook up a proof of concept. And it gave me general ideas. It gave me ways where I could head in the correct direction. And there's one issue with AI where it tends to be biased and tries to just feed you back information, and it tries a lot to pretend like it's right. So as the expert, you have to say, okay, this doesn't make any sense. Or you have to be like, okay, it's giving me some information, let me just double check this. Because one thing with AI as well, it gives you a response, but it doesn't necessarily tell you where that response is from. So it could fully just make up things on the spot, which I've had it done to me before, and I have to be like, oh no, that's not actually how that works,
Right.
Especially when you ask something in your domain, it'll say 1 + 1 is 3, and you're like, okay, that's not right.
No,
and you tell it it's not.
No, but 1 + 1 is equal to 3 for very large values of 1. So you never know.
well, you're not wrong, but that's the thing, So it comes with context. So sometimes I'll ask the question, it gives me a response. I'm like, okay, I can see why you think this way, because you don't have the correct context, and I have to open the chat with okay, I'm referring to this very specific situation,
right? And
you're like, oh, well, in that situation, then no, and I'm like, you could have confused me there. It's definitely AI though.
Okay. It's interesting to hear that you're doing that. Interesting what you're talking about because we are also, you mentioned the crypto and then tying that into artificial intelligence as well and figuring out how things work. I was talking with Ava. She's another one of our mentors.
Yeah.
It's not Ava, it's Eva.
Eva.
And we were talking about the fact that we have crypto and crypto is transformative, but we've had large numbers of cases in recent times in which the problem has not been so much the crypto, but the management controls around crypto. And so therefore, the challenges of auditing crypto are also an important factor. Based on your experiences, and you are doing the finance application of this thing, how do companies handle the challenge of auditing their crypto to make sure that bad things aren't happening because of the managerial controls around it?
I'll admit it's like a very hard task because you have to look at like the issue in itself. Like, what does crypto represent? So in general, it represents, decentralization, government involvement. A group of people can come together with a similar cause and get something done. Now, where I've seen the issue is, and I think this was basically the same for NFTs as well, where you have a whole platform where the goal is to preach about decentralization, and then you have something you're trying to resolve. And the quickest way to resolve those issues is actually centralization.
Right.
So people essentially usually create companies or other platforms that encapsulate crypto, and then they're saying our platform to solve your problems, and that is that's basically centralization. So what tends to happen is when you have platforms that integrate with crypto, they'll give you some of the decentralization aspects where everything's on the blockchain, everything is open, and you're able to be anonymous to a point. But at the same time, you have to still integrate with the company and do like what we call in finance as a KYC process, so know your customer. Right. So that's where you like document to prove that you are who you are and you live at this era and this is your tax number, etc. And that basically takes away I'm gonna butcher this word, but the anonymous aspect of it, right? Then you have to then make sure that you trust this company with information and data. And it's one good thing is that any company that tries to what we call convert crypto to cash, there are lot of red tape, right? In terms of processes of what they have to do, what they have to validate, how they store their data, what encryption routines and algorithms they use. Or if they can't do it themselves, they usually upload that work to other, trusted companies in the industry that does those things. So it's like you're keen on a balance of trying to keep the decentralization aspect of crypto, but at the same time, you have to sort of centralize to resolve some issues. Because at the end of the day, if we're thinking of crypto as only like a monetary unit, it's as good as you can spend it, right? If nobody's going to take a coin, it doesn't have any value, technically speaking.
Right.
As opposed to if it has like some utility tokens. Utility tokens are pretty cool. Where tokens themselves, they are like, okay, if you have this token, you have access to this sort of service, right? So that's not a service and that's monetary gain. And I feel like that's probably easier to trade because, for example, if I had like a Peter token and every time I give Peter the token, I can just, go around his office and use his office. Right. That's easier to, trade than try to get cash.
Right.
So it depends. As I say, usually even with the AI, it usually depends on the context. So it depends on what you're trying to do and what problems you're trying to solve. You can kind of try to find creative way to resolve them without giving too much control away from your users and trying to not centralize everything.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. We often forget that the money has value because people feel that it is of use to them in going around their daily business. And when you have something like a central bank, people have an assurance, hopefully, that the central bank is not going to be printing too much more money, so
Mhm.
that the value of that is maintained, and trying to figure out how you do that translation between the the real money and some of this other crypto type of activities is always going to be a challenge. And
Yeah.
so,
One thing I'll say though
mhm,
that's really good is that it removes the boundaries of countries, right?
right,
Because you get money from one country to another can take like extensive work, paperwork, issues, a lot of red tape around that. But if your money is in crypto format, all you have to figure out is how to withdraw, right?
right,
Because there's no limits on how you can really transfer that money across the blockchain.
right. Yes, it's a double-edged sword. It can be used for both good
Yes.
and bad.
Yeah.
We with the Palisades Foundation have, we have issues on a regular basis with transfers of money to the various volunteers that we have. We have the Google Summer of Code, the Google Season of Docs. We get payments for the stipends for the mentors themselves. And in a number of cases, I've been trying to send the money to the various mentors, and I get rejections saying that this transaction has been rejected as being suspicious. And it's like, it's this, I got the money from Google
Exactly.
into my account. And when I'm transferring the money, they ask for a comment, and I say, I'm transferring the money that Google gave me to the mentor. And they say, something's fishy here. I just
Yeah,
had
it's ridiculous.
I just had a situation where, after a number of tries, I just decided to send the check by mail, by FedEx. And I had to spend quite a lot of money because I'm FedExing from California to Jamaica a check. But
Yes.
after delays of almost 4 months, I thought it was only the right thing to do to set the record straight. And we had tried at least 4 times to get this going. We tried using Payoneer. We tried Payoneer to a different person. We tried PayPal. We tried going to a bank-to-bank transfer to the Scotiabank account in Jamaica. We tried a bank-to-bank transfer to an account in the United States. It was like, and this is for a legitimate purpose. And so you try all these things, and you get rejected, and automatically you're probably flagged by the same artificial intelligence that you're talking about. And so you now have to figure out what exactly is the next thing to do. So it's a very real world example. And yeah, I would like to be able to do a blockchain solution if I had it. And in order to get around those sorts of problems, and if they can find a way in which we, what would be probably even better would be to have a standardized set of criteria for for the transactions. So if we are going to be using the blockchain for somewhere to say it has passed these international criteria, whatever it might be, ISO, this, that, whatever, and therefore it should be okay, and therefore it just goes through. But having a different set of criteria for this company, for that company, for this jurisdiction, it it's just too crazy. And for the transfer of like under $1,000, a one-time transfer, that is definitely not money laundering. But I just don't know.
And Peter, I'm very glad that you brought up like standardization as well, because this was another issue I noticed when when we had the whole NFT boom. Like it's going on now, but it's not as big
Right.
as it was a couple months ago. So one essential issue, one issue that presents itself is that to so to create standardization, you need protocols, right? So you need an organization to come together and they agree and say, hey, this is what we're going to do going forward. Everybody need to adhere to these things or these standards. The
Hmm.
issue now that presented is that a lot of bureaucracy here now. So it is now a slow process to change. And to
Hmm.
have innovation, you need to have things being able to be changed and adapted quickly. We
Right.
have a billion problems to resolve, a billion people on them. We can't, be having them handcuffed to, standards.
Right.
But so the issue now, what presents itself is that when you have decentralization, you have a standard. We can't innovate. So what
Right.
ends up happening is that people from companies and corporations and then create their little their own centralized platform so
Right.
that they can innovate on top of it. So it's
Hmm.
like working against each other.
Right.
So I think it's similar to when I was doing a lot of reading about when the internet just came to life, right? A lot of what some people's idea or vision they had for it. They were like, oh, everybody would have their own servers and be able to host their own websites.
Right.
But the truth is, nobody wants their own server.
Right.
People want information. People want to host things online, but nobody wants to, be bottled down with the infrastructure and the
Right.
work that it needs to set up, because that's not the value aspect. The value
Right.
aspect is being able to have your business online, being able to read online, stuff like that. So it's like, so at the end of the day, I think things are still going to be directed down to like what users and what people want. So people don't want to have to set up their own blockchain servers. People don't want to have to manually look at the blockchain. People don't want to have to do all those things. They want a simple platform with good UX where they can just integrate in and get the value that they want out of like a system. It's also why it's hard to get people to understand the value of their information, right? They'll go on a
Right.
website, they'll say yes to all cookies. So, I do that sometimes. I can't even complain, but
Right.
it's because they don't understand the danger.
Mhm.
They'll just go on a website, they'll just say, oh, take all my information, and they don't see the value of the information because the value to them is not their information, but the
Right.
service presented.
Right.
So it's really, I guess it's really increasing education around that, and then
Yes.
trying to find good ways where it's hard for people to be taken advantage of. And that's
Yeah.
the whole point of why we have like red tape around a lot of industries, like for example banking, and
Right.
why you have things that check for like fraud, because it's easy to fool people, or take advantage of people,
Mhm.
especially when they're not like tech savvy, right? So
Right.
you have to think of like your parents, your grandparents. If you send them a link saying that okay, this is from their son, they probably won't really check the URL, right?
Right.
They'll just click the link because they say okay, Peter sent me this link, so
Right.
it's important.
You know,
But it's a very hard problem.
I will challenge you when you say that nobody really wants to have a server on their hands. Nobody wants to have this. They just want to have it just work. But that requires a certain degree of standardization, and the internet has a number of standards. There's the
Mm,
Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF, which creates these things called RFCs, which
yes.
are requests for comments.
Mm.
There are these never-ending mailing lists that occur and threads in which they do
Yeah.
updates to it. The HTTP protocol is an example of it, and then the various variations of it. And so standardization has allowed the internet to proliferate very, very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that the Ethernet was created maybe, well, 30, 40 years ago, and as a cabling standard slash signaling standard for using networked or cabled computing systems. And then now we have the 802.1 various
Mm-hmm.
RFCs for Wi-Fi and wireless. Those standards help to make the internet even more useful. And I'm wondering whether it wouldn't make sense for there, and I don't know whether this exists, to have the equivalent of the IETF for blockchain type standards to help with those sorts of things that are more technical, and then when governments are always going to want to have their finger in money because
Yeah.
they want to make sure that they can get tax revenue to provide services. So then after that, try to figure out how that interaction could work. But it seems if we have these silos of expertise and silos of standards, it's really not going to work. And it's going to create a system where we have um, software and services that are not useful to the end consumer. So, for example, if it weren't for Chrome and Firefox, Internet Explorer would have never improved because
Yes.
right. If we didn't have in the beginnings, if we didn't have the Apache web server, IIS as a software platform for web serving on Windows would never improve. We
Mm-hmm.
now have simple things that people use on a day-to-day basis, like LibreOffice as a clone for Microsoft Word and Excel. If we didn't have those things, those products also wouldn't improve. So A, competition is good, but B, standardization also is good to help. And so if we can find a way to have those two coexist, then it'll be better. If there's greater standards, then the overall market expands and provides a greater opportunities. And having a more parochial view on things probably would be not necessarily be the best approach. But it's interesting to have the discussion, right? Because if you don't start thinking about these things, nothing
Yeah,
changes, right? So
that's true.
that's interesting. So I want to come back to not so much tech, because we've been talking about tech for like almost half an hour now, and I want
Oh,
to talk about, yeah, time flies. What I'd like to
yeah.
talk about is Jamaica. So there are many people from around the world are probably going to be listening to this interview as a part of their preparation for Google Summer of Code and that sort of thing. If somebody were to visit Jamaica, what would you recommend that they do? And so there's the tourist stuff, and then there's the other stuff. So let's talk about the tourist stuff first. The things that most people do when they come to the island, and then let's talk about things that Troy really likes to do, as that really makes him feel a part of the country.
Okay. All right. So I guess you're right. We'll start with the tourist stuff. So, and I think it depends on where you're coming from as well. So, for example, if you're from somewhere where you don't have a lot of beaches, then definitely you need to check out the beaches here. Even in Montego Bay, that's where I'm from originally. No, I live in Kingston. They recently opened a park there called Harmony Park, right? And they cleaned up the beach. Okay, it's still a public beach, beautiful waters. That's one thing I'll say the government has been doing a very good job with. So clean up the beach. The park is very clean. Amenities are close by. But like I guess with there as well, you'll be able to interact with a lot of locals
Mm-hmm.
because, for example, if when I travel myself, my prerogative is to not be distanced too much from the locals or people in general, right? Because I feel
Right.
like people make the experience fun.
Mm-hmm.
So naturally, you'll do like water activities, so boat rides, jet skis, trampolines, like that's on the sea, stuff like that. You'll also want to try to be invested in the food, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you probably want to try to find a restaurant because you're in Jamaica, so every restaurant at this point is a Jamaican restaurant, right?
Right.
So you can get some Jamaican cuisine. I live here, so I'm really used to those stuff, right? So on my day to day, I don't do that as much because if you live there, you're used to those activities. But I would definitely, recommend, right? We're Jamaica, we have the best food in the world. Anybody can fight me on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I would definitely recommend food, water activities. Um, Depending on where you are on the island, you can probably find a museum close by if you're into art, or even if you're not, you can walk through for 10 minutes, 30 minutes, so you'll have some memorable pictures that you can take. What else could you do? There are a lot of attractions because we have like other like water parks and theme parks here as well. Um, Zoos, uh, like there are a lot of things I could probably ramble about
Mm-hmm.
as it pertains to what I feel tourists should do,
Right.
but mostly just walk to activities and at the very least the food,
Right.
and we have a lot of national like monuments and statues like rambled about the place that you
Mm-hmm.
can go to and get nice pictures of, things
Right.
like that. I've been seeing concentrated effort to keep them clean
Right.
because I remember before there was an issue where there wasn't much work being done to clean the general area and
Right.
keep the place maintained, but I've been seeing an effort to do that, so I'm actually very grateful for that. I think that's basically it.
Okay. So let's talk about food. You just mentioned food, and then you sort of briefly went over it and didn't really go into much detail. I was
Yeah.
talking with Eva and Noman, and I was telling them that Jamaica has different types of curries, which I think they didn't think about: the curry goat, curry chicken, etc. What sort of foods would you recommend that people try? And of course, pepperiness and spiciness is something that many different people have different levels of. So you may want to talk about different levels of that as well as part of your descriptions.
Okay, so oof. So because the thing with Jamaicans, we're very creative, right? So anything anything that can be a meat can be curried, essentially, right? So curry chicken, curry goat, uh, even if your food specifically isn't curried, you could ask the shop owners or whatever to put curry like gravy on it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So curry gravy, so rice and chicken and curry gravy. I recommend ackee and saltfish to anybody, even if you don't like it. You want to try it to get the genuine Jamaican experience. Spoiler alert, I'm not a fan, and people have challenged my Jamaican card for that. Um, and to
Okay.
be very fair, there's a lot of active diversity as well, because there are different types of akis as well as like how it is prepared. So it could be that those first few interactions they just weren't prepared well. So I actually need to re-challenge that, you know. But I just
Okay.
never got around to it.
Hmm.
There are actually a lot of restaurants as well. So the I know Montego Bay in general is where most tourists will go, right? So you'll find out a restaurants for there. So finding food is gonna be the easiest thing. Like however
Hmm.
far you throw a stone, you'll find a restaurant, right?
Right.
And and what I tend to do, for example, last year I was in Colombia. What my friends and I did was every day we went to a different restaurant. So we just picked a random direction, walked
Hmm.
until we saw like a restaurant that looked like colorful, that looked expressive enough that it has the culture.
Right.
And so I recommend anyone coming here to do the same thing, right?
How did you visit Colombia? Did you go with Copa through Panama, or did you go direct?
I flew through Copa,
Okay,
through Pan
through
yeah,
Panama. Where in Colombia did you go? Did you go to like Cartagena,
Cartagena.
Bogota? Okay.
Cartagena.
Did you have there's this soup that they have in Colombia, but it's more like a Bogota thing. It's called sancocho, and there's another one called mondongo. Did you have any soups when you were there?
Oh no, I didn't have any. So you should have told me this before I flew out. I definitely would. Because the thing is, when I went, I didn't go with like a checklist per se.
Right,
Um, like separate and apart from like one or two activities that we planned, right? Because when you
right,
travel, you say, all right, let's do these two activities. The
yeah,
other plan was to kind of just go and explore, right? So I
right,
would go to a restaurant and the menu is in Spanish, right?
right,
So with my little 200-day streak in Duolingo, I can kind of figure out some of the stuff, and the staff is usually very helpful, and
right,
they're patient as well,
yeah.
right? So generally, because my approach to any restaurant is just to pick something I can't pronounce on the menu and be like, I'll try that, right?
Okay.
It works 7 out of 10 times.
Hmm.
3 times,
A
not the
diff
best experience, but to be
uh,
honest, the experience is what I'm looking for. Like
right,
trying new things.
right. Yeah, so I visited Colombia when in the very early stages of my marriage, and I went there to do a
Mhm.
intensive Spanish course because I thought I was going to be working for a Latin American based subsidiary of in Jamaica. And so I got off the plane and I was in a taxi going to where I was going to stay, and I just talked to the taxi driver once again in my high school Spanish at the time, and I said to him,
Oh,
"What food do you recommend in Bogota? Like, what is the good stuff?"
mhm.
And he just said immediately, he said, "You need to do sancocho and this other thing called mondongo." One of them, and it's really strange that I think sancocho is like a soup. It has things like yuca, which is like tagine in Jamaica, and then it
Mhm.
has and it's in Bogota, but it has fish, and it's in the middle of the mountains, but it has fish and some other things, and it has a very light broth. It's sort of like a Jamaican chicken soup, and but it's with
Okay.
fish, but it's not like a Jamaican fish tea, which is more of
Yeah.
a hearty, a thicker type thing. And
Hmm.
then the other one, sancocho, is the same thing, but that's more like a regular chicken soup. And it's really, really good. One of the things that they put inside their soups is that they put, what do they call it? Is it peppercorns? No. Oh, they put this thing in there. Um, capers.
Capers.
Yeah, capers. So it's like it's it's like yeah, the closest thing I can think of is like it's a very tiny pickle. It's like it looks like a seed,
Oh,
like black pepper, but it's green and it's usually pickled, but it gives this flavor to the soup. So when you taste it, you have this slight flavor of the capers, and so that was an interesting addition that they had. It's interesting because the Colombia and Jamaica are relatively close together. That sort of food is very, very similar, but they have
hmm.
different ways of coming about it. So that was one thing. The other thing that I remember with Colombia was when I went there. Colombia, the Bogota is up in the mountains. It's like
Mm.
5 or 6,000 feet above sea level. It's fairly cold in the mornings, and on the street corners they would sell hot chocolate instead of coffee. And then you'd think that you'd be in Colombia and be selling coffee. No, they sell hot chocolate, and they would put a big lump of cheese in the hot chocolate.
Okay, that's
Uh,
interesting.
yeah, so it's not like cheddar, but it'd be like
Mhm.
a relatively soft cheese. So it was sort of melt inside this thing, and it's not like a aged cheese, so
Yeah,
it doesn't add a lot of flavor. But because it's so cold in the
mm,
mornings, right? You need the heat, and then you also need the fat in that thing to keep you
yeah,
warm until
yeah.
breakfast or whatever. And so you would never think that the combination would be good, but in that certain circumstance, the people that are there have figured it out. You need this hot chocolate with a bunch
You
of
need
cheese in
that.
there. Yeah, you need the
Yeah,
heat and you need the fat to help out with the day, and
and
it's really interesting.
and that's the thing, Peter. That's why I usually encourage people to, like, if they can't travel, like, research, right? Because I would say having some diversity in, like, your knowledge source, it builds you. It builds your character. It builds your worldview. Meeting other people, seeing how they live, seeing how they adapt to the circumstances, and that can actually help you to figure out, like, how to solve problems. Because even in tech in general, right?
Right,
Because that is a big thing in tech that we're trying to have more of.
right,
And I can use GSoC as an example, Google Summer of Code, where reviewing those pull requests was a learning experience for me as well, because as you said before, when you're working full time, you probably don't have as much time to do things like experiment, right? Because the risk is different,
right,
right? So I can't just use technology that isn't vetted on platforms that millions of people be using, especially when it's money. But GSoC is that field where you can work in and be like, okay, let's try to find a creative way to solve this problem, right? What can we do different than the standard approach?
hmm,
And generally, from people with different backgrounds, different restraints or different experiences, they can come with different solutions, and you can be like, okay, this is a learning opportunity for everybody right now, right?
right,
This is a new way we can solve this problem, and if it's not standardized, we can say, okay, how could we get this standardized? because
right,
because even before you were mentioning about standardization, not that it's a bad thing, but generally it's like a slow process. But it's
right,
very good though, because one good thing with standardization is that it creates guardrails, right? Because platforms and processes are built upon standardization, so it creates guardrails so that we don't fall into the same pitfalls that would probably harm users or consumers of, like, a product or, like, software or anything in general, to be honest. So it's really just finding that balancing act.
You know, procedures aren't just guardrails. In many cases, procedures and like the discipline of it creates freedom. And people often think that how can you have freedom with discipline? It just
Yeah.
doesn't seem right. But if you think about it, your life is dictated. Your freedoms are dictated by a certain discipline. The freedom that you feel safe on the roads is dictated by the discipline that people are going to stay on the right side of the road, on the right side of the correct side of the line, that they're
Hmm.
going to stop at the stop sign, that they're going to turn right and use the right turn signal and not the left one,
Yes.
right? So there are these various types of disciplines that you have that allow you to go about your life in a way that certain things in your life are structured so that you can allow your mind to drift in terms of creativity in other areas, right? And so that's one of the things that we've tried to do with the Palisades Foundation. We have certain sort of relatively rigid structures that we would try to have, which are things like making sure that people get assigned issues before they work on it, that everything is tested. It
Hmm.
has its limitations, but with that, the bugginess of the code that we have is much less.
Hmm.
It is much more we are much more productive, and that allows us to expand in new areas. And it comes back to the same thing we're talking about with the RFCs. Those
Yes.
standards allow us to have a proliferation of devices on the internet for
Hmm.
various reasons, and so that it really is helpful. But I want to come back to the Jamaica thing because we're talking about the tourist things that people can do on the island.
Mhm.
What things does Troy do, and that provides him with a little bit of interest? So if somebody really wants to get the true Jamaican experience, what would that be?
All right. So things that Troy do. So I do a lot of things because my whole thing is to try to get new experiences, right? So growing up, I did a lot of things where probably would be outside the norm for the average Jamaican, right? So I did like some tennis at some point. I did taekwondo. And to be very fair, if you really do view these things in the context of Jamaica, it's really it's really the thing itself, but the Jamaican spice added on, right?
Hmm.
So, for example, doing taekwondo, my sensei was Jamaican, right? So even though the tenants themselves, are from Japan or from Eastern, we can have the Jamaican context and how we approach the things, right?
Right.
So one thing he always spoke about was as a practitioner, you have to be rough to the strong but gentle to the weak, and it's more to speak about how you navigate the Jamaican society in terms of like, oh, if you're someone strong, you know, you don't approach someone who you feel like lesser physically, I guess, where you try
Hmm.
to abuse them.
Right.
But that was more like the Jamaican spin of how to say it, the Eastern proverbs, where if
Right.
you try to say that to the random person, they probably wouldn't really
Hmm.
get what you're saying. But if you just say, oh,
Hmm.
rough to the strong, gentle to the weak, you're like, oh,
Hmm.
okay, that makes sense,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I feel like you'll find similar things as it pertains to like other things. Like for example, I did some archery here, so um doing that, seeing little games that the practitioners here would create to have you improve your skill. Like create some targets, say, oh, here's
Right.
some points, or create a target with like a human being or like a goblin or some other
Hmm.
animal, and you hit it and you get targets and you get points. Seeing that probably would be different from someone coming somewhere else who do the same thing, who do martial arts, somewhere else in the world, or do archery somewhere else in the world. So maybe if I try doing those activities elsewhere, I would say the implicit differences. But back to things I do. So I do a lot of like restaurant hopping, right? So
Hmm.
or cafe hopping.
Ah,
So
foodie.
yeah, kind of.
Right.
I'm trying to, widen my palette because the
Hmm.
thing with Kingston is that there are a lot of restaurants, right? Not a lot of physical activities nowadays. I know there was a bowling alley
Hmm.
somewhere, but that got closed down recently because of like COVID. But you go around, try different restaurants, try activities. Usually you can go to Portmore. Portmore is not that far from Kingston, where you can do things like skating. I've tried as well. I mentioned archery. Trying to think of more activities that I can, participate in, but trying
Right.
to balance like responsibilities and stuff because I'm working and
Right. Right. I
yeah,
will give you a little known.
sometimes.
I'll give you a little known fact about the Palisados Foundation. Christian, who handles our grants, so she's the one that helped out with the Google Summer of Code application. She also helped out with the grant applications that we're having for outreaching. I think she's a double or triple black belt in Taekwondo.
Wow,
Yeah,
really?
yes, she is.
Huh.
And she has told me that her living room, I think her living dining room area in her home
Yes.
is all hardwood floors and can be quickly transformed into a training center. And she occasionally does sessions with people on
Mhm.
Taekwondo in her home.
That sounds very on brand.
Yeah, and so here's another thing. She has now started because I've been creating these videos for the YouTube channel for the Palisades Foundation, and I use this software called KDN Live to do
Yes.
the edits and stuff. And I told her, hey, Christian, you should try to think about using KDN Live. It might be a useful skill to have.
Hmm.
And she has now been recording training sessions that she's had with people online in Taekwondo during the pandemic. And she's been posting it online and editing it with KDN Live.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's nice.
that's interesting. She was talking to me about it as something that she finds very rewarding, and that's really great. So you'll be, I ask you, make sure you're on the call tomorrow, because she's going to be talking about what we're doing with outreaching as another potential source of interns for the Palisades Foundation. And she's going to talk about that. And I ask you to ask questions about Taekwondo and what she's been doing related to that. I think that would be interesting, hearing it directly from her. That would be
Yeah.
good to know. Okay. So that's I was in Jamaica just recently. People may probably know from my GitHub account that I live in California at the moment, and I try to visit Jamaica from time to time. I was in Jamaica just recently for the Christmas period, and I went up into the Blue Mountains on a regular basis to try to avoid the traffic craziness in Kingston at Christmas time.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, so I drove around up into Newcastle, Holywell. I actually did that on 3 separate occasions because I just found it just different. I said to myself, I have a choice. I could go to the beaches, but beaches at Christmas time in Jamaica are always going to be crowded. And I just said, you know what, this time I'm just going to do the mountains. And there's some little restaurants up there. Went to a little cafe. It was really nice. I took my members of my family up there. That was really nice. So that's another option. People may not think about it. They think that Jamaica is just beaches all the time, but
Yeah.
Jamaica has mountains that go up to maybe 2,000, 2,500 meters, 7,000 feet.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so we have mists and forests. We have pine trees that people don't think about, and then we have
Oh,
coffee plantations.
I
And
know 2 things that
yeah,
people probably think about
yeah,
that I've heard that like available in Jamaica are things like mountain climbing specifically and
hmm,
like surf. Because I have a friend and he does both of those things, and I'm trying to probably get involved, but
right,
there's probably some barrier to entry there, so I
right,
need to actually have a discussion with him surrounding that.
yeah,
But I heard there are 1 2 good mountain climbing spots here.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really true. I went up to Blue Mountain Peak, which is the highest peak on the island, when I was just recently graduated from school, from university, and I walked up there and over basically an overnight hike. It was it wasn't really taxing. I mean, it's a long walk, but it was good. And just for people who have not experienced it, people who are climbing up to the top of the peak, they start the walk like at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, because you want to start during the nighttime and walk up there because you want to get as far up the mountain as possible before sunlight, and when
Hmm.
it really gets hot. So that also helps. Fortunately, Jamaica does not have a lot of poisonous and feral animals, so you don't have to worry about being attacked. So
Yeah,
that
yeah,
is one of the strategies that we have. So that's another area as well. Okay, so that's interesting. So we've talked about technology, we've talked about the Jamaican experience, etc. Um, and I'm going to ask you more of like a interview question. Like, I
yes.
remember once being asked this question. Somebody asked me, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" And I said, I see myself in Silicon Valley. And they asked me, "Where's that?" And I said, "Okay, we're not talking on the same wavelength." So,
Ah,
like in your case, where do you see yourself like in 5 to 10 years? Like,
all right. So
what do you plan to do with your life?
So that is a good question, right? And the
Mhm,
reason why for me I'm shaping that out now is that I feel like I'm at the end of my last, what are you doing in the next 5 years, period in
mhm,
time. So, I'm finished. I've completed college. I've worked with a couple different companies in different industries between telecom, banking, logistics. They each use their own spin of how they can solve those problems.
mhm,
I've been thinking of getting more into maybe AI or maybe UX because I do a lot of mobile development nowadays, but I'm
mhm.
trying to see if I can pivot back to mostly either back-end architecture or
Right.
understand more how user experience should be formatted. Because, for example, even Jamaica, in the context of Jamaica, a lot of our online platforms and services, they seem to skirt around the whole UX process. So
Mhm,
if you, for example, use any banking solution, it's like horrendous
mhm,
for lack of a better word.
mhm,
Things are misaligned, hard to navigate.
Right.
I feel like it gives you the impression that there's not much thought into
Mm-hmm.
like how should I use this app, right? Um, I know some services have been trying to do better. For example, my local shipping company is Rocket Ship, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm using their website, their platform, as well as their mobile app. I'm actually friends with the developer of the mobile app, so I can give him feedback there.
Mm-hmm.
And so far, it's been a pretty decent, straightforward experience, right? And I've been seeing companies, especially newer companies, making strides in that direction because if you're not used to Jamaica, you have some companies that basically have a monopoly on certain industries,
Right.
and how the other companies or new competitors breaking in is really with the user experience, right? How
Right.
can we make the most simple process for users?
Right. Right.
Generally, personally, I feel like the big players are getting really comfortable in their spots, so that's how you can break through really and truly.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And there's always opportunity. When I was working at Google, I had the opportunity. I was working in their data centers for a year or so, and people were showing me
Mhm.
their data centers. And I'm quite proudly saying, "Hey, here's this thing." Most people think that we have like 100 of them, but we actually have 1,000 of them.
Ah.
And here we have all this infrastructure, and
Mm.
most places have 20 of them. We have 60 of them. And so I was looking at it and thinking to myself, man, if I were going to start up a company, I just need one.
Yes.
And so
That's that starting point.
you just need a starting point. And so that was part of the rationale behind when we started my company. That
Yeah.
was, we didn't need to do everything for everybody. We needed to do one thing for the little guy,
Very well.
and do it
Very
and try
well.
yeah and try to do it very, very well. And so that's been very useful. Talking about
Yeah.
AI,
And
yeah,
sorry
go
to cut
ahead.
you off, Pete. I just realized I didn't. I still feel like I didn't properly answer the question.
Hmm.
So as it pertains to where I see myself in 5 years,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of in terms of like possible paths. So I've been playing with the idea of going the whole digital nomad route because I work fully remote now, right? I've done a lot of work to transition to being fully remote, right?
Hmm.
So one aspect is I could just travel the world and work.
Right.
I could also probably travel to UK or Canada and work because some people who I do some work for are within those countries.
Right.
So maybe a good move to go to that side and see what the environment is like.
Right.
Um, and then otherwise it's really good to go into like a different domain. I'm looking into primarily being a cloud engineer maybe, or
Hmm.
taking are pushing are pushing more education in like UX, but I feel like I can probably do both, right?
Right.
I can probably learn more UX stuff while looking at the cloud as well.
Right.
That's basically my official answer for that question.
Right. But also remember that you want to keep a finger on some of the pulses of things that are going on. So we mentioned the AI, and we've also mentioned the crypto stuff.
Yeah,
Sometimes you get
there's so
this,
much.
yeah, you get yourself divorced from it for a little while, and you know how it is in tech. You stop doing something for like 6 months, and then you're considered
A
not to
newbie.
be, yeah, you're considered to be a newbie all over again.
Level
So
one again.
right, you're starting from scratch all over again. So you have to be careful. But it's always good. It's always good to think about what you want to achieve and the types of activities that you need to do in order
Yeah.
to overcome some of the barriers to what you want to achieve. And
Mhm.
it's always good to. Um, my wife jokes with me from time to time. She says, "Peter, how are you going to? You want to do all of these things, but how are you going to overcome this?" I just say, "Look, that's details, details, right,
Details. I love that.
right,
As one thing I've tried recently, and this is probably advice for anybody out there watching this, is that
right,
you want to break into a field, especially when you have no context.
right,
Your best bet is to find someone already in that field and you just ask them a bunch of questions. So one approach I took was there was a particular company I was interested in, and they had someone on LinkedIn who had a role of AI architect, right? So
hmm,
I made a connection with that person on LinkedIn, and I was very straightforward. Say, hey, I'm looking into this role now. I'm very new. I do development. I'm not quite sure what the transition would be. Would you like to
right,
connect and have a discussion? And they're like, okay, cool. People generally are very friendly because what you tend to realize that is that people in their careers at some point or another, they got assistance from someone, right?
Right.
And they're generally very willing to give back. So I kind of with that person on LinkedIn, very cool guy, very straightforward as well. And I was able to ask him a bunch of questions in terms of like, all right, I'm at this point in my career. How would I transition to, AI architect? Where could I get resources? And he basically um gave me the whole rundown to the point where I found he I can't remember the website right now. I'm so sorry, but he gave me like directions in terms of where I could go to get resources, where I can go to learn, what his approach was, because he's where he is at now because he found something that works, right?
Right.
So it's really good where you can cut a lot of time to figure out what is tried and tested,
Mm-hmm.
path in order to get to like a goal or an objective.
Right.
Otherwise, you'll find yourself going, in circles trying to figure out what's the next approach.
Right.
Or even worse, you'll find yourself in what we call tutorial hell. So you're
Mm-hmm.
there going through a billion tutorials and you never feel quite ready or enough, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
don't know what to measure yourself up against.
Right.
Yeah,
Analysis paralysis, sort of.
exactly.
Right. Yeah, I know. I know that feeling. Like, when do you actually jump off the cliff? You
Exactly.
get prepared. You buy the parachute. You buy all this other stuff. You buy the
You have
mattress.
two parachutes.
Yeah, two parachutes, and you have the mattresses at the bottom of the cliff. When do you actually
Yes.
jump? Right. So yeah, I understand. Um, you mentioned AI. Do you see any way in which we could start preparing Talawa for AI?
Um, so one thing with AI in general is that any model or solution you create is only as good as the data that you have, right?
Right.
So one aspect could be one, seeing what data that we can get ethically, of course, user consent and so on and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
and well as asking your users what they would want as well. Because you can
Right.
create the best solution, but it doesn't matter if the users don't want it, right?
Right.
Because I've listened to a bunch of you like podcasts, right? There's one
Mm-hmm.
podcast called Your First Million,
Right.
right? Where they interview a lot of millionaires or startups who have like either $1 million or 1 million subscribers, etc. And and
Mm-hmm.
and they'll speak about it's all about what the users want, right? I have a
Mm-hmm.
friend who has a very popular Wordle app right now, and he was thinking about a whole elaborate new feature. And he said he just sent the users a survey and he realized that 80% of the users thought his idea was a bad idea. And what they
Mm-hmm.
actually wanted was just a small tweak that would probably take him an afternoon. And he's like, look at that.
Right.
I would have wasted
That's
developing
right.
a new mode when all they want is
Right.
um an extra word in Wordle to
Right.
guess against, right? So it's really figuring out creative ways to figure out to determine what your users want, figuring out what data you can get, and figuring out what you can do with that data. Because the thing with AI, a lot of it is just predictive analysis, right?
Right.
So someone tries to do something, and you can predict what outcome they actually want.
Right.
So that's where it comes. That's where you see a lot of like auto completing text, image generation,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. So it has to do with the whole creativity aspect and problem solving aspect.
Right. Well, the area that I was thinking about doing, the one that AI seems to be most interesting, potentially for an application like Talawa, would be for the administrator of the back end. And so one of the challenges that many people in nonprofit organizations have is trying to find out whether somebody would be willing to volunteer for a particular activity. So if you had a way in which you could attach certain tags to certain volunteers, their age, whether they their gender, the number of children they have, how old the children are, those sorts of things. If you could get those sorts of things created as tags and then use that to learn against those people who actually volunteer, the number
Mm.
of activities that they are participating in, etc. So that when you're looking for somebody else to volunteer to help out with, your work is even easier. And
Mm-hmm.
so rather than going back all the time to the same people over and over again and essentially burning them out, you now have this opportunity to say, hey, we now have this other person that has just come in. They have a similar profile to somebody else. You don't have to do anything else. The system would just say, hey, this person meets the profile, and that could be somebody that you could work
This
with.
person will volunteer. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get you. And I'm actually very happy that you brought it up. I don't know if you saw the smile that came up on my face when you spoke about volunteerism, because I was on Twitter, I think a month ago or so, and I had to bookmark the tweet, and someone was saying, "Hey, it'd be very cool to have an app in Jamaica where it would help nonprofits find volunteers." And I'm like, okay, that's like a very simple, straightforward, solution or problem to solve. And I was surprised to see the amount of retweets and likes that tweet had, and it seemed like something that a lot of people would be interested in. And it sort of dawned on me in a sense where we probably do have a lot of people who are willing to volunteer, but there are not any easy, I guess, platforms that I know of so far. I haven't done enough research, to be honest, if I'm being honest, where they're able to say, "Oh, I want to volunteer. Can I just go to some place? Is there like a random beach cleanup where I can just show up?" Because otherwise, they would have to, find an organization, be involved, subscribe to newsletters, listening along the grapevine to see, if any activities are happening.
Right.
And so our activities would have to be planned like months in advance, not as opposed to, hey, I'm in an app. Oh, there's a beach cleanup Friday. I can just subscribe in the app. So our subscribe in the cleanup. So the organization themselves would probably know that, oh, we can expect 100 people, so we probably want to have 100 water bottles if they're planning to give out water. Stuff like that makes organizing those things easier.
Right.
And I think as someone who probably has closer ties to those organizations and nonprofits in Jamaica, you can probably ask them like, hey, what would be a simple solution that we could create to help bridge the gap between the organization and potential volunteers?
Well,
right?
Talawa is the thing, right? And so you'd have a list of past volunteers, because and then potentially, if we could have like a cloud related thing, we could potentially do something like, of all the organizations that we manage, these sorts of people meet these sort of criteria that you're looking for in terms of finding a volunteer. So that's interesting. And so I really think we should start thinking about some AI features. And we could probably talk about it tomorrow in our meeting. The other thing so there is a site that I used to use. It's called volunteermatch.com. And I would sign up for that, and I would get volunteers to help out with the Palisades Foundation.
Okay.
I had very, very poor experiences with it. Because if you want to be a volunteer to give out, like you mentioned before, water bottles at a marathon, for example, that's a one-time commitment. You don't really need to have a resume, etc. You just turn up and there you are. With what we do, for what I needed to get done, I wanted to find somebody who could help me out with handling the grant process for the Palisades Foundation. So now that means I need to have somebody who's trustworthy. So I need a resume. I need to talk with them and interview them, and then
some specialized skill set need to be in there as well.
No, not really, because anybody who you just need somebody that has good writing skills. They don't necessarily, and Google searches help you out with telling you where to look for money and things like that. So it's really more writing skills and understanding how Palisades fits in with the various volunteer areas. But the issue that I had was that of 100 people who would send me resume, who would say, I'm interested in being a grant writer type person, of those people, 1 in 10 would send me maybe 1 in 20, 1 in 5, between 5 and 10 would send me would be willing to send me a resume. And then of those people, maybe 30% of them, of the remaining, so like we go down to like 3 people out of 100, they would be willing to actually talk to me on a phone call. I said, can you talk to me on a call? right? And
Yeah.
then of those people, there'd be one left that I'd select and say, hey, would you be interested in doing it? And more often than not, they would only stick around with us for maybe a month, and then you have to
Mm-hmm.
start the process all over again.
All over
A
again.
100 people. And so when I found Christian, it was like a godsend. I said, whoa, please don't go, please don't go. So
Yeah.
it's been really, really important for us to keep that in mind. And so if there was a way in which, like for volunteer match or whoever,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to, if I had a way of providing feedback to say, um, of this advertisement, X number of people responded, which they know already. X number of people actually spoke to me. These were the people who spoke to me. These were the people who stuck around for a certain amount of time. Now you have these data points,
Yes.
right? And now you can say when somebody volunteers, you can now give them a ranking
Yeah.
to say that the likelihood of this person actually following through is 2% versus 90% versus 50%.
Mm-hmm.
At least that gives me an idea as to whether I should be wasting my time or not, you know?
But
And
the thing as well, Peter, and
mhm,
it just dawned on me as well, because the one issue with AI as well is that generally it lacks context, right? So for example,
mhm,
so I guess this also ties back into AI ethics. So as the creators of models and solutions, we have to now try to make sure that our solutions are unbiased. Because
right,
for example, I can use my phone. I got a new phone recently, and I took pictures of myself, and I realized that I guess because of my lighting, of the lighting and maybe my skin tone as well, how it processes the images is not the best quality. So I'm looking at that, and I find that in different situations as well, where unsuspectively the AI may bias against some people with probably
right,
but certain background or
right,
certain economic circumstances, and so on and so
right,
forth. And it doesn't do that purposefully. It just turns out that people within certain, like, I guess, groupings
right,
may fall out, not because they wouldn't want to participate. So I'm gonna tie it back to your social,
mhm,
they wouldn't want to volunteer, but more so because they automatically get flagged because the AI isn't able to fully realize that this context or this
right,
data point doesn't actually matter in the grand scheme.
right, right,
So I
right,
guess it's being very intentional with like the data
mhm,
points that you do feed, an AI system, because maybe like an MVP, you can just throw it anything, but after
right,
you start to try to work the model and try to have it optimized and more precise, then you have to be
yeah,
like, okay, be critical, because we don't want to create a solution that end up backfiring.
yeah.
You know?
You don't want to have a whole bunch of false negatives, right? As well,
Yes,
false
exactly.
positives are one problem, but if you're looking for volunteers, you don't want the false negatives. That's
Especially
the
in
yeah,
volunteering.
right.
Yeah.
And so
And I
that's
think these are the same issues that people find when they're trying to like hire in
mhm,
general, right? Because working in the field, and I speak to managers as well, that's essentially the issue. That they have a hundred candidates and they're trying to figure out what candidate actually knows what they're saying that they know, or
right.
who just knows what the buzzwords, right?
Mhm.
Because in of itself, interviewing is a skill, and sometimes you have those diamonds in the rough where you have some people that don't interview very well, but you put them on a laptop, give them any task, seconds, it's
Right.
over there. They're able to solve the issues. They're able to work well in the team, but
Hmm.
it's just that they don't give a very strong first impression, right?
Right.
And you're trying to not, weed those people out.
Right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's actually a very hard problem to resolve, right? And I don't judge anybody who are trying their best and they're not able to really find the person or the people they're looking for.
It's been an hour and a half, and
Oh wow,
you would have never thought it, would you? Right.
no, no. I figured I figured I probably have 30 minutes of like content in general, and then we'd have to just call today.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons that I try to have a free flow type of discussion, because it then allows people to start talking and expressing themselves more and provides more context. I think that has really been useful. So, Troy, thanks a lot for taking the time out. And I hope that we'll be able to put this up on the internet very shortly. And then from there, we'll see how it goes. So, thanks a lot for being a mentor for the Palisades Foundation. I hope that 2023 with the Google Summer of Code is a very successful one for us. And then we'll see what happens from there. Thanks.
All right, awesome, Peter. So it was my honor of being here. Very fun.